All right. Hello. Welcome back. Today's guest on Finally Seen is Suzy McNamara, author of The Silkworm, The Magician, and The Sister Tree, A Tale of Love and Loss. Suzy's book is a moving and deeply honest memoir about love, caregiving, grief, and what it takes to keep going after profound loss. After losing her husband to early onset Alzheimer's and her sister, who was also her closest friend, Suzy turned her story into a book that gives language to heartbreak, resilience, and the search for hope in the middle of pain. I'm honored to have her here today. Suzy, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You know, you're such a good writer, and you started off your book with your sister, the phone calls with your sister. I thought that was interesting. Why did you start the book there?
Well, I was told that a good way to write a memoir is to encapsulate 1 year of your life. And unfortunately for me, in 1 year, in January, we found out that my sister was probably not going to make it. And then my husband died in December. So it was just the perfectly terrible year. And I really wanted to give people a sense of our relationship. And I feel like the best way to give people that sense is to really show a conversation between the two of us and how close we were and how easy and how much of a daily audio journal we had our entire lives. And so that's why I started the book that way.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. And, I love how much dialogue your book has, because it really, like, when I'm reading it, I can see you in my head kind of talking back and forth to whomever it is you're talking to. So I think you did a brilliant job. And, earlier in the introduction, I said something about your husband having died of early onset Alzheimer's. That was a lot to deal with, just those two deaths in a year. But put on top of it early onset Alzheimer's, which is so much different. I want to talk about that, because I know most people don't really realize there's a difference between early onset and, the Alzheimer's we hear about on a regular basis.
Right. So I guess I'd say there are two real differences. One is the difference in the time of life that it hits. Because for a man, my husband probably started with Alzheimer's when he was 52, and he wasn't diagnosed until 57. So the illness probably took hold of him when he was 52. And at that time of your life, your marriage should be thriving, your job should be going great, your career should be going great, your relationship with your children should be developing as they become young adults. And all of that was robbed from him. And it was robbed from taken
Everyone.
from all of us. Right. And so you have a lot of issues that are different when it's early onset Alzheimer's. You have job loss. Many people, if they're older, when they get Alzheimer's, it's so terrible, so awful for everyone involved. But they probably don't have to deal with sudden job loss of the person afflicted with Alzheimer's. So that really affects the family in a lot of ways. It affects your loved one's sense of who he is, and it affects your finances, which can be devastating to a family. But also, it really affects your marriage in a different way, because at that point, you should be partners. And all of a sudden you feel your partner drifting away from you and you don't understand why. I thought, he was suffering from depression because he had lost his sister, or, maybe he didn't like me as much anymore, because there really was all of a sudden a drifting apart, and I couldn't explain it. And that was very, very painful. But he was at the time, hiding his illness, as many people with Alzheimer's do, as long as they can, because they're embarrassed. They're ashamed of their symptoms. And so there was no real explanation. It was confusing to me and confusing to my children and confusing to his friends. So those are issues that really affect the whole family when somebody comes down with early onset Alzheimer's. Another issue that's different is that they look so darn good. I mean, my husband was really handsome, and he was able to be charming up until maybe the last couple of weeks of his life. So you don't get the kind of emotional support that you might get if your loved one is older and people see that he's, he clearly is struggling. Bob wasn't clearly struggling for, a really long time. And that's hard for all the people who are caring for him because not only are you not getting the emotional support, people don't understand the pain, the grief of losing your connection with that person. And that's different. Another difference is early onset Alzheimer's tends to go faster. So the progression can be really shocking. And every day is a new occasion for grief. Every day I could feel his symptoms worsening. There'd be something that he couldn't do. And, with the shortened time span, it really is very traumatic and shocking.
I can imagine so. And, I'm glad that you brought that up about the appearance and looking healthy and looking quote unquote fine. And I know I've experienced that on my own side with caring for Sienna, who has special needs as an adult. And I can't tell you how many times throughout her life people have said to us, well, she doesn't look special. I'm like,
You're,
what does that even mean? But you're right. It's really frustrating. And I know you told me a story once of how, um, you kind of had to switch from wife to mom almost in kind of parenting essentially.
right. It really does a number on your marriage. It changes your relationship. I mean, Bob and I, we just had this incredible bond, this incredible magical bond. We talked all day long about music, books, movies. We had so many inside jokes. I mean, he was really funny, really witty, but also we just, he could say a line from a book and, we would just be, so madly in love over a line from Yeats. And that was just such a sad thing to go away. And it does go away, a little bit at a time, you feel that connection frame.
Yeah, I know you talk a lot about identity shift, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't get when it comes to the caregiving is that identity shift, and you kind of lose a sense of who you are and well, who
Right.
you were. Talk a little bit more about that.
Well, first of all, you lose your identity as a wife and a romantic partner and a partner in all the decisions that happen in a marriage. So that's strange because like you mentioned before is you do become more of a mom. So, one day you're this, you know, cute wife hanging out with her handsome husband, and then all of a sudden the next day you're a mom taking care of somebody with a very debilitating illness. And so you have to look at yourself differently because you're not the same kind of woman you are. You're the wife of a man with Alzheimer's. You're also the wife of a man who is dying. You're progressing towards the day where you're going to be alone. You're going to be a widow. So that really changes who you are. You know, we had a lot of issues right at the beginning because Bob was in charge of our finances, and that all fell apart because of his illness. It wasn't his fault. He wasn't able to manage them. And so I lost my identity as being a socialite, in my very wealthy suburb. And I lost my identity as a socialite also because I didn't have time.
Yeah.
I had to work, and then at night and on the weekends and many days too. I was at home caring for him, so I didn't have that whole social world. So that really changed who I was. But the funny thing about it is with all those identity shifts, is I didn't really so much mind being home and changing the way I lived my life. I didn't mind having that expensive lifestyle anymore. I was so focused, and I'm sure many caregivers feel this way. At first it's shocking to have that sudden identity shift, but then you can really, really dive into that lifestyle and really spend all that time with the person that you're caring for. And what's difficult is the people around you because you've really changed as a person, the things you care about. really changed.
I'm sure quickly too.
About parties anymore. I didn't care about material possessions anymore. All I cared about was Bob and my kids. And that was really difficult for a lot of people. So while your identity is shifting, you really, by necessity, need to change who you surround yourself with. You need to surround yourself with people who support the new you, because it is a new you. And I mean, if you want to be supported, want to feel elevated, want to, want to survive, then you really have to be authentic, own your new identity, proud of your new identity, which, takes some time for sure. And then the people that gravitate you, the new you, that's your community. And those are the people that are going to be there with you for the whole run, you know, until this horrible, tragic tale is over. That's going to be your system of support.
You said in there something about proud of your new identity. That's an interesting thing. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that like that. What helped you kind of get to that point where you were like, you know what, here's my situation. I'm proud of how much I'm showing up.
And what helped me was being honest about it, which isn't easy because, the first few times I tried out being honest about it with people who are used to the way I was before, it didn't go so great. But I kept at it, and I kept sharing my story in little bits. And when I started started realizing that people really wanted to hear what I was saying, and I was actually helping them, because everybody has problems. Everybody struggles with something in their life. And I think that when I saw in the way people were reacting to me, reacting to my honesty, that it was helping people and that they were drawn to me for that, that helped me to be really proud. I mean, somebody mentioned to me about writing a memoir. Well, I started writing poems and putting them in my Christmas cards. And some of them, were pretty sad, even though they were Christmas cards. And then, I could tell that people were really reacting to what I had written. And so, when somebody talked to me about writing a memoir, and I kind of tested it out by mentioning to people like, oh, I'm thinking about writing a memoir. And when people reacted by saying, I think that's a really good idea. You have a story to tell, and that story is going to help people. I started getting more confidence because that story, that memoir is me. That is my identity. And that made me feel more confident about myself.
I love that. And you're so right because, which I love your poems, by the way. I think you're a great poet.
Thank
So,
you. That's so
um,
nice. Thank you.
well, it's always nice when there's a memoir that is really well written. It's not just you telling a story like, here's my story, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
No, you've got real depth in there and actually, takeaways for people who they can identify with parts of your story. And your honesty it kind of gives them permission to be honest with the
Right.
situation, whether it's a crappy situation or, you know what, this is a joyful moment. I'm going to suck it all in right now.
Right.
Because that's one thing I love about your book too. It doesn't just sit in here's our situation. It's not all like that. You really, it seems like tried to find joy and acknowledge those moments of joy. So yeah, I'm glad you wrote the book.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm glad.
Yeah, there's a lot in there for sure. I guess, unfortunately, because it all happened. But I guess the good news about having gone through all this, or the joy that I can find in having gone through all this, is the fact that I think I do touch on a lot of troubles that people can encounter. And I think that they can see themselves in me. And, I made a lot of mistakes. Like my whole life, I've made a lot of mistakes and I try to learn from them. I wish I learned before I made them, but I don't. I always learn the hard way. And, I'm totally happy sharing that for whatever. I think because I have gained this confidence, I am totally happy sharing all these mistakes I've made, all the experiences I've had, and all the great experiences I've had, because I just love that moment when somebody sees themselves in you and then somebody shares their own story, which I love hearing other people's stories. That's one thing that's been so amazing in this whole journey is getting people opening up to me because I just love, as my dad would say, I love, figuring out what makes people tick. It's my favorite thing to do. So, I'm hoping that I've opened the door to having many, many, many more conversations where people let me know what makes them tick,
I think you have, and I think we share that in common too. That's one reason why I do what I do, is because I love
Mhm.
getting to pull the stories out of people and
Yeah.
then elevating those stories. Um, like you said earlier too, something about knowing that your spouse was going to die.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that anticipatory grief, because that's
Hmm.
something that I don't think a lot of people talk on either. That constant
Hmm.
knowing that this end is coming. And you write in your book too something about hospice, and that means death, So talk a little bit more about that.
Well, the thing about Alzheimer's is you are losing them a little bit every day. So that is part of the anticipatory grief is a part of them dies to you every day. A little bit of Bob was all of a sudden gone every morning that we woke up. And so there's just this constant loss, this gradual and constant loss. Um, but it did not prepare me as well as I thought for when the end came, as much as I should have been prepared and I thought I was preparing. I say in my book that, I decorated our bedroom just so it would be like a perfect end of life, nest for Bobby. I wanted all his favorite things were there, like our Irish Writers poster, a little picture of James Joyce, his favorite, and Notre Dame memorabilia and pictures and Jackson Brown albums, all this stuff, because those were all the things that, all the magic of Bob. But so I thought I was preparing, but when it came time to it, I was absolutely not prepared. And that really, really shocked me. I really thought I would be better at that than I was. As soon as I kept denying all the obvious signs that he was going to die. He kept pointing to the man in the corner, all these things that I should have been, but I was in such denial. I just did not want to let him go. And I do think part of that, well, first of all, because I loved him, and of course I want him to be here, but also I think part of that is because then I really once, my identity had been his wife, and then my identity was his caregiver, which was very different, but still connected with him. And then I didn't really know who I was going to be once he was gone. I'm still not 100% sure who I am. But, so I think that that's part of it. I think when you lose somebody in your life, you you lose that person who you love and you love spending time with and who's defined your life in so many ways, but then you really do lose your sense of yourself because that person was so important to who you are. Bobby was my whole world. Well, Bobby and Lizzo both. And you know it's very, very difficult when your whole foundation are one or two people and then all of a sudden they're gone. You know,
Yeah.
how do you survive that? How do you rebuild yourself? I'm working on that now.
Yeah, because if your sister were still here, I'm sure she would be with you every second
I
of the
know.
day going through it all. So not only did you have to navigate losing her, but then navigating losing your husband without one of your big rocks. So
Right.
it's incredible.
Right. I mean, when Bobby was diagnosed, that was the first thought I had in my head was, well, I'll be okay. I was trying to myself, I'll be okay. I have Lizzo and I have my close friends, and that's your world just changes too much. I mean, losing her, I'm never going to get over that. That I just won't, and that's how sisters are.
Yeah.
We're not getting over so much as learning how to live
Yeah,
without.
I know what you mean. Like just
Yeah.
learning how to become you in this new chapter
Right.
that you didn't have a choice in entering.
Right.
um,
Right.
let's
And it was, if, when hospice, they kept saying the word hospice, and I kept like, I didn't want to hear that word because it does mean death. And I just was really dragging my feet and really had a hard time even saying the word. But, part of that is you really have to, part of being a good caregiver and part of surviving is just accepting reality. You have to accept reality, as difficult as that reality is. And, that was just the one reality I really had a hard time accepting.
I mean, I would imagine so. Like biblically speaking, the two of you became one 30 something years ago. That's a long time.
Yeah,
uh,
true.
and,
It's true.
I know your faith plays a huge part in everything you do. Talk a little bit about where that played in this whole journey.
I do write a lot about my faith in the book because I converted. I was raised in a Jewish family that my father was an atheist, and we were raised to be atheists. And I decided when I was 14 to convert to Catholicism. And it's funny because I sort of feel like God may have had a plan. Like he knew that I would have this incredibly difficult time, so he wanted to give me a faith, that would help me. And it really did. So I read a lot of Teresa Davila. That's where the silkworm comes in. And she writes a lot about cocooning yourself, building a world around you so you're not distracted by the outside world. And in her metaphor of the silkworm, the cocoon helps you become in union with God. And I I thought about that metaphor quite a bit when I was caregiving because first of all, I think it's a great metaphor for caregiving too, because you really do have to cocoon yourself. The outside world is scary and difficult for somebody with Alzheimer's and for their caregivers. And so it's great to build kind of a cocoon around yourself so that you just can focus on the person that you're taking care of, make that environment as safe and healthy and joyful as possible. So I use that a lot, but also cocooning myself, it made me feel, more like I got to know myself a lot better, and I got to sort of dive into my relationship with myself and my relationship with God. I became very aware of his presence in my life, which was really nice because I never felt like I was totally alone. Like I felt like, I mean, I talked to God all day long and, I never felt abandoned. And, this world can make you feel pretty abandoned sometimes, but that really helped me to not feel that way. It also helped me because my husband was dying and my sister died. And um, I imagine them happy and healthy now. I really do believe that they're up in heaven and they're happy and healthy and hanging out together and laughing and having fun. And that's just so joyful for me. It's so much easier for me to accept what has happened. I'm happy for them. I'm jealous. They're together.
You hear
I
that a
don't
lot.
want to feel soon or anything, but just that image. I mean, being another really important part of my faith is especially what Teresa Davila is because she talks about a lot about the gift of suffering. And one extremely difficult part about caregiving is watching how much your loved one suffers. I mean, Bob really suffered. He suffered emotionally because of his loss of identity, because of his loss of physical abilities, because of his fear. It was really scary because he was partial, he's legally blind. So, and then he suffered physically as well in many, many ways. And really wrapping your mind around how suffering brings you closer to God. Like I just kept trying to focus on that because it's really pretty brutal to watch the person you love suffer that much. And then with my sister, she really, really suffered too. So being able to sort of contextualize it and um put some sort of positive feeling towards suffering. I mean, that helped me a lot.
I think a lot of people if they were in a situation similar to yours, I think they do feel abandoned. They have a hard time holding on to their faith. What do you think it was that allowed you to really grab in and hold on to your faith and not feel abandoned?
And well, I know what you're saying, because I easily could have been, pretty mad at God for, you know, giving my husband this horrific illness, and taking my sister from me and making her suffer as much as she did. But I think for me, I think what always helps me is, and this may sound just so strange, but is reading. Like, I read a lot. I read a lot of Teresa Davila. I read a lot of Therese Lisieux. I read a lot. And when I read, I can really internalize things. So, those books became my guidebook. And the way that they talk about um, God not abandoning you, suffering, like I mentioned before, I really internalized those lessons. So, also another thing is, I grew up without faith in my household. And so I've never for a single moment from the time I became Catholic have taken that for granted. And not that people take it for granted, but I think they have a different feeling for it. I mean, I fought
Yeah,
to have this faith. So, and um every year I do a little spiritual audit where I think about, if this is still the path I want to be on. And from the moment I became a member of a church, I've never looked back, because it's just given me so much. And I know what it's like to live without faith. I know how hard it was for my parents, to struggle with all of the challenges that everybody has at some point. It was incredibly difficult for them to be sick and pass away. They really struggled during those times. And, I run away from that when I can, because I just hated to see how desperate and lonely, they often felt in their struggles.
that's a fantastic point. I love that you had that perspective from a young child, and so you were able to see the other side. That's really powerful.
But
Um,
people have to come to that feeling, authentically to themselves. It's easy for me to say the way that I feel and the way that it helped me, but that really has to, you know, I, I would advise people to perhaps try to develop that kind of relationship, only because it was so helpful to me. And, but that really has to be authentic to them. They really have to feel like it's helping them. And, I hope it does. I know how hard this life is, this kind of, this caregiving life is. And, and, I would be so happy for anybody who could get the kind of comfort that I got in this way.
yeah, I know. My faith carried me a lot whenever Sienna was young, and I mean, obviously throughout the years, but just really helped. I remember a time when one of my classmates, she said, "How are you so calm right now?" And I said, "It's going
Hmm.
to be fine. I just know it's going to be
Hmm.
fine." And I remember that moment because I truly felt like it's going to all work out, and
Are
I think
you?
until you feel those feelings, it's really hard to describe. But if you've had that experience, you're like, "Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about."
Right.
I want to
Right.
talk about your sister too, not to like derail us, but I know she was such a huge part. You
Mm-hmm.
have this tree, and I know the tree has kind of turned into something way bigger than you thought it would. So let's talk about the
Uh-huh.
tree.
Tired of overpriced energy drinks full of junk? Same. That's why I use Babella, a self carbonating hydration packet that gives you clean energy, electrolytes, and vitamins without the crash. Just add water, shake, and sip. It's way more affordable than typical energy drinks and way better for you. Use code ChrissyBernal15 at checkout to get 15% off at drinkbabello.com. Hydration just got an upgrade.
So the sister tree is giving me so much joy and community. when my dad died a long time ago, my sister and I picked out this tree in a park near my home and put a plaque. And then about a year and a half before Bob died, and before we even knew she was sick, before she was sick, I guess, I was on the phone with her, walking right near the tree and telling her about the funeral plans that I'd made for Bob, because I am a planner and I knew what he wanted. So I'd started the plans just to get them in place so it would be the way that he wanted. I started them about a year and a half before he died. And I was telling her about them on the phone. And she was like, oh, just when it's my time, just put a plaque for me at Dad's tree. Because I was passing by the tree. And I told her that. And we laughed because, we planned, we were going to be old ladies together. But so we just kind of laughed. And I was like, oh, I'll try to remember when we're old to do that. So then, when she died, it was sudden. And the next day, I was like, well, I remember that she wants a plaque at the tree. So we could only have one plaque. I took my dad's home, put her plaque there. And it was really, really difficult. It had grown to this big, beautiful tree by this point. It was 30 years. And so I picked out a plaque and picked out a song that we loved to be on the plaque. And I would go every day and walk by, but it was really hard for me to look at the plaque for a long time because I just couldn't face the fact that she had died. I just couldn't accept that. And then one day I was just standing by the tree and a woman came up to me and she said, oh, I'm so glad you're here. I come here every day. And, this woman seems young. And I was like, oh, it's my baby sister. And she's like, well, my sister just died too. And I said, why don't you bring some flowers or bring something? This tree can be for your sister too. I don't know what overcame me, but it's not so much something that my sister would do because she was so humble and so generous. And it just felt good to have like another woman there that we could understand each other. I think that's really what overcame me, just the bond.
Yeah.
And so eventually we did a little ceremony with my friends, and I've just been inviting women who have lost sisters. I get them stones with their sister's name on them. They're really nice. And then we put them by the tree, and I just know Liza would love him. She'd love like not being the center of so much of attention, having all these women around her. And it's just such a beautiful community. But the best part about it is going every time there's so many sisters, women I know who have lost sisters, which is just so devastating. And, but every time we go and we bring the stone, the best part is, I ask them to tell some stories about their sister. And it's just so awesome to hear these stories, and to hear the way, just hearing the tone of voice that women take when they talk about their sister that they love. It's just so amazing to hear. And it's really built up a community, just celebrating women just in general because we're great. Aren't we awesome? And but we just celebrating and that bond, like a sister or somebody who you feel is close, if you're not lucky enough to have a sister, a woman who you feel that close bond with. And it's just really incredible. And the funny thing is almost every single woman has mentioned missing not being able to pick up the phone and call their sister when something happens, which is, I miss that 5 times a day because we talk several times a day, most of my life. And it's just funny that that's like the one thing, because I think women communicate and express themselves verbally. That's how we process feelings, or that's how I process feelings. And so it's just interesting that that's definitely a commonality, is that missing just that constant communication.
I love that you turned it into something bigger than what it was. And I guess God probably, he orchestrated that probably long before.
Yeah. Yeah. And he gave me a place to go. And, I love to walk. So I get to walk to the tree, and I love to see people there. So it does make me happy. Now I can look at the plaque. It took about a year, but now I can look at the plaque. Well, now that it's surrounded by the stones too, because it's really sweet to put them. And I put one for my mom, technically not a sister, and a couple of my mother-in-law too, who I love, and a friend of mine's mom. And they're the grandmas watching over the sisters.
That's awesome. That's so neat. I
Yeah.
love that you put a song on your sisters as
Yeah.
and you've had requests from people to add their sister, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Once I think I put it on Facebook a couple times, and then people have asked me to either for their own sister or a friend of theirs who lost their sister too. It's really great. I mean, it really has been great. And I invite anybody in the audience who would like to join, because it's just such a wonderful, it's just a joyful way to remember somebody. It's so painful to lose that person. And if you can make anything joyful out of it, that's just a wonderful way to remember them. I mean, because my sister was so joyful. She was so happy. And she brought so many people, so much joy. So she should be remembered in a happy, joyful way.
I love that. Well, and it's so many other people coming together. So it's like an
Mhm.
immediate visual cue that they're not alone. And so
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Physically, you feel supported because you're surrounded by people. And just even going there when we put the stones on, just having that experience, it's like a ritual. Um, but the ritual is grounded in community, in support of community.
I love that. One of the things I know you like to talk about is how the church and community can help
Hmm.
um, women, but caregivers in general with ongoing grief that they're going through. Tell me a little
Right.
bit more about that.
It was funny. Well, when Bob died, I was just overwhelmed by how many people came to our little tiny condo to support us. And I can't tell you how much that meant to my kids, to me, to his close friends who had been with us, throughout the whole journey, just to see this whole community come out. And I mean, his funeral, this was standing room only. I mean, and it was amazing, not because like, oh, we're so popular, but because that was just such a visual of the support that we would get. And also, all those people help you remember the real person that has died. One of the saddest part about Alzheimer's is that you lose the real person that they are long before they actually die. And that community helped bring him back to us. And, all the stories, you know, all the friendships that he had, all the jokes and the laughing and that all just brought Bobby back to us in such a real way, and continues to support us. I stayed in the same town. I just moved, but I stayed in the same town that Bobby and I raised our kids in, because I never want to be away from that community. I never want to be away from all those people that saw Bob on a daily basis. The same restaurant we would go to, all those things. I guess it could be a little bit sad, but it also just keeps them so much alive to me. And, we had a wonderful, happy marriage. And for all that time that we had this wonderful, happy marriage, we were with the same group of people in our community. And I want to be around people who think of us that way, who think of my marriage in that way, think of our life together and the time that we raised our kids. That's how they think of us. And that's who I want to be with.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that we've talked about your book being cathartic and you've had to read it out loud multiple times, which thankfully your publisher has had you read it a few times out loud before it goes live, which is
That's
smart.
a good thing.
So,
Found some mistakes.
whenever I first learned that you already wrote a book, it's about to come out, and Bob hadn't been gone for very long when you started writing. How did you get the strength to write? Or was that how you found strength?
Reading and writing are my ways of sort of working through things. And I think while Bob was sick, I kept a journal every day. And the great thing about that journal is I got to put down all those terrible thoughts that you have while you're trying to process what's going on. So, and you get it kind of out of your system. And so I was used to writing about everything that had happened. And so for me, it was writing the book was kind of like my daily therapy. I would write, it was really painful to write about Lizzo because I hadn't done that in my journal, so that was much more difficult. But writing about what happened with Bob, um, that actually really helped me. I mean, I would recommend it. Writing a book and working through publishing it is a lot of work. So I don't know. I want to recommend people do that unless they want to. I'm sure it'd be fantastic memoir, but I think it really actually helped me. So people were like, oh, another thing is I didn't really feel like going out. A lot of people, they're so nice and they invite you out and they want to include you, which is, amazing, amazingly kind of them. But I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave our little nest, where I'd cared for him for all those years. I just wanted to stay in that space. I don't know if that was psychologically healthy, but that's just how I felt. So I was happy to have something to do at night that didn't involve,
It
going
ended
out.
up with a good book. So, I mean, yeah, you did a good job.
What's interesting is I had a few friends read it and they were so nice to take the time. That was really nice of them. And one piece of feedback I got from one of our best friends is, he said, you write so, specifically about the bad stuff, the bad stuff that happened, and you're very honest. And I think that'll really help people and all that. He goes, but I want you to write a little bit more about the good times. And that was harder to access right after he died, because I was still so much in that zone of, of him leaving me.
Mm-hmm.
And how incredibly difficult that was, and of him being sick and how hard that was. So it's harder for me to access those memories. They just didn't come out of me the way the other stuff did. And so when I focused on writing about the good times, that was magical. That was amazing. It brought me back to that time. And it was really painful at first in some ways, especially talking about our connection with books and all that stuff. That was painful to write about because that was so missing in the last few years. But, I'm so glad he recommended doing that, because I think it makes the book better, first of all, because it really shows what was lost, and, but it was really, as painful as it was in the beginning. I'm just so glad to have that in there now. It's nice too,
Did you find that as you were trying to access those good parts that more just started coming? Did it make it easier to find them?
Once I started, and more have come since then, but now it's too late.
You'll have to do another book.
No. But yes, once I sort of clicked that or flipped that switch, then I was able to think more, more of the good times. And, I think people, especially people who love Bob, are going to enjoy that, or love me, are going to enjoy that, remembering. Another thing that really helped is my son Tommy. He gave the eulogy at his father's funeral, and the one thing that really helped me access that more is, I was so mired in all this grief, and then he was talking about our marriage, and he just said my parents were happy people. And isn't that so sweet? I mean, I just think that, because after what had just happened and after the years, and even though we brought joy, and it was different than being just in your core like a happy person, because our days were really difficult. And sorry, I live in Chicago, and this is a common occurrence.
I'm in Houston, and so I think
well, we're right in the city here. And so when he said that was like a miracle to me.
that's a nice gift. Yeah.
It really was. It was. And it made me feel like, another problem with caregiving, especially when somebody dies, is you do feel like a failure. And it's completely irrational, obviously. But that's how you feel. You feel like, and when hospice comes to your door, you feel like you gave up. None
Mm,
of those feelings are rational, but that is how you feel. And then to go to the funeral and have them talk about us being happy people, that like really helped a lot. It did.
that's awesome.
It did.
That's really neat. And that's, such a good example that you guys obviously set for your children. I mean, that's huge. When I read in your book that y'all didn't argue, I was like, what?
We've never argued. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. Yeah, man.
And then believe me, that's because of his nature. He was so kind and gentle and, went with the flow because I was raised in a household that fights. So, there were a lot of fights. And so that's what I was used to. And then, living with Bobby, I really had to change that part of me, because he was not up for fighting ever and not in any kind of like shutting you up way or in nothing like that. It's just, how could you fight with him? He was so
Just
kind
diffused
all the
it.
time. And, but another problem with that is it really, I was very ill prepared for those tough conversations that you have to have when you notice, which happens to every caregiver of Alzheimer's. You notice something's different, and you tentatively say something. This is very common, and it's hard to bring it up because it's, well, I mean, you don't want to think that something like that could be what's going on, and then it is, and the person, your loved one, will be angry, you know, because they're scared.
Yeah.
And because they've been trying and succeeding for so long, hiding things, and then they're angry. And I just, Bob fought me so much on going to get the diagnosis, and because he was ashamed,
Yeah.
and it's very sad. And I just was very ill-equipped to handle that part, to be honest. Because I just wasn't used to that in our marriage. I was used to us agreeing all the time on everything, and so that was difficult, but we got through it, and actually once the truth came out, it was so much better because he didn't have to hide it anymore, and he was very relieved,
Yeah.
and so, but yeah, I definitely was not prepared for that portion of the beginning of the caregiving journey at all.
Well, that leads to a good spot. Where or what advice do you have for other caregivers who are, yes, caregiving is tough, but I'm talking about like in your type of situation where you were not expecting this type of thing at all.
Yeah.
So, what kind of advice would you have for them?
I think my biggest piece of advice is to figure out what is going to help you survive it, because it is going to be difficult and every person is unique. What helped me might help somebody else, but it might not. You have to find what is going to help you. And a big part of that is figuring out who you are as a caregiver. You do change. You're going to change, and accepting that sooner rather than later. That's another piece of advice. Just accept that your life is going to change drastically. Figuring out who you are and who you can surround yourself, that celebrates this version of you, supports this version of you. Um, I think you have to, another piece of advice I would say is everybody, absolutely everybody tells you what to do. Everybody. Whether they have any, knowledge base or not, they will tell you what to do. And, you have to be confident, talk to your doctor, develop a good relationship with your doctor if you can, and be confident about the decisions that you make as a caregiver, because everybody's going to question what you do too. And that's really difficult, and it makes you feel terrible. It makes you feel very unsupported and isolated. But you have to be strong in that situation. It's your job to take care of your spouse or whoever you're in charge of. And I guess another piece of advice I would give is if you're somebody like, especially with early onset, you have children that are in their teens or 20s, is to develop an honest form of communication with them. I had a hard time giving my kids the bad news, like telling them, being really honest with them about his condition and about what was to come. I mean, he really had a hard time, but even me as the person who should have been much more honest with them and save them of anxiety. I think we try to protect our kids as parents
Yeah.
often, but all we do is make them worry that something else is going on or, worry that they're not getting the whole story and then can make them very extremely anxious. So it took me a while and I'm not sure I ever 100% got there, get to that point where I was just not sugarcoating anything, just being super honest with them, just so they could process things at their own speed. And because it was going to happen whether or not I said it was happening, I couldn't protect them from it. And just sort of facing that would have been better. It would have been better if I had allowed them to express their sadness in a real way. I'm not a crier, and we weren't encouraged to cry in my household growing up, and so it's just not. I'm not comfortable with it, and I'm not comfortable. I wasn't comfortable seeing my kids cry. It made me, I would try to get them not to, and I wasn't allowing them to, you know, have their own feelings in an authentic way to them, and I'm hoping I'm being too hard on myself, but I don't think I am. I don't think I am, unfortunately. So we got there, and the kids ended up, they, especially Sean and Colleen, who lived with us, they became caregivers too,
Yeah.
and they were both amazing caregivers, and so they were given the gift of accepting their father's illness in a gradual way as his illness progressed. So as much I couldn't sugarcoat it for them because they were right there.
They were there.
And
Yeah.
that was what was best for them. To be honest, I think for the older kids who didn't live with us, they were relying on me, and I'm not sure I handled that as well as I could have. So I guess I would advise, if you're in the situation, unfortunately with early onset, and you have kids that are old enough to process the news, that just really try to make them your partners right away, instead of trying to baby them or protect them, because it doesn't help.
Yeah. The kids can always sense that something's up, and then they end up creating a story in their head that's probably way
Right.
worse. And then they internalize, and yeah, it just spirals. So I love that piece of advice. Well, so when is your book coming out?
So I believe it is going to come out at the end of May. It's done. It's been copy edited. It's going to the proofreader now, and the book cover has been picked and selected. And so it's just a matter now of the publisher laying it out, putting it all together, and it should be published at the end of May, which is very exciting.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited. And then you'll have an audiobook
Good.
a few months later. So that's exciting.
I can't believe anybody would want to listen to the Chicago accent first. I keep saying that, but I know everybody says that it's a memoir and you should read your own story. And so,
Well, you
I
can
will.
hear the warmth, and when you talk about the joyous parts, you can actually,
Mhm.
you light up, and then that translates in the audio side of things. So
Good.
yeah,
I
I,
love
I concur. You should record it.
it. Well, I can definitely do the best imitation of my dad and my sister.
Oh, that's going to be great. That's awesome. Well, where can people reach out to you or find the book and connect?
Oh, I guess they can reach out to me on any of my social media accounts. I'm pretty active on there these days, so that's nice, on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. They can also email me at Suzy, SUCY, at SuzyMcNamara.com. I love hearing from people, so I really do. So please reach out. I need some company, so reach out to me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a feeling you'll hear some people, especially in
Oh,
the country.
good. Yeah, good.
So,
And Good. Definitely. And if anybody would like to visit the sister tree, I'd love to take them. Now that
Yeah,
weather's getting better in Chicago. So that's good.
I saw that. I saw that this morning, and I thought, oh, okay, it'll be a decent day up there for them because I know y'all had a brutal
We
winter.
had a tough winter for sure, but we're hardy.
Yeah, y'all are. Well, thank you for joining me, Suzy, and
Thank you so much for
sharing
having
your
me.
stories. You're such a good writer, and I encourage everyone
Thank
to
you.
and to follow you on Substack. I know you've got a Substack, and it's getting going. And so, yeah, just to experience your writing more.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive into that actually, the more long form. That will be great.
Well, and one thing I'll say about, I know you said earlier that people who knew you or knew Bob are going to love this book. But honestly, when I was reading it, I could see people in my life similar, like, I can see, pieces of that person. So that was really, relatable. So yeah, I hope everyone goes and buys the book.
I'm glad.
And
yeah.
So thank you.
I think people will see themselves in the relationships and just in the day to day of what it's like to be married and what it's like to be a daughter and a sister and a parent. So I think so.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again.